Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches, and today I am talking about Day of the Panther, a 1988 Australian martial arts movie. And Day of the Panther is about Jason Blade. So that name at the top of the image there is not an actor's name, it's the character's name, Jason Blade. And he's an Australian member of an international anti-drugs task force, who also, surprise, happens to be a martial arts expert. And together with his partner in the task force, Linda, he's investigating a drug trafficking ring headed up by Kingpin Damien Zukor. I love the names in this movie. Blade's investigating in Hong Kong, while Linda works the case back home in Sydney. But then Linda falls foul of Zukor's goons and is killed, and Blade leaves his work in Hong Kong and returns to Australia, intent on avenging her death. Much punching and kicking will, of course, ensue. So, I mean, Day of the Panther is kind of fairly distinctive right off the bat because it's an Australian martial arts film, which is not exactly a burgeoning genre, but it has some other things that I think are worth talking about as well. And the first thing is, I'm going to praise the movie. This may come as a surprise to you, but I'm going to praise the movie. So, like, as plot hooks go, They Killed My Partner it's a really obvious, straightforward revenge story. We've seen it how many times? A lot, basically. The nice change of pace about this movie, though, is that we get to spend some time with that partner, and she gets an extended action sequence of her own that establishes her as a tough and resourceful fighter who is eventually overcome only because she has to face the big bad while already wounded and exhausted by his minions. So she beats a whole bunch of dudes before finally the big bad comes for her and she gets taken out. More films, should give this kind of attention to the hero's dead friend. Too often the audience is given no reason to care about the dead person other than the protagonist does. They killed my father. They killed my, sister. They killed my cousins, nephews, hairdressers, masseuse. We're not actually shown a connection on screen. Not so here. We're shown a connection on screen. We're given some time to get to like Linda and to root with her, for her as she's fighting off all these goons. In fact, the one weakness of this sequence, honestly, is that it's probably the best fight scene in the film, which is a great way to kick off a movie. Really great, really great fight scene. But it's a little bit underwhelming later when probably it's the most extravagant, intricate, varied fight scene we've seen. Secondly, I want to talk about, I guess this is sort of more about 80s. The 80s, so the 80s saw a number of attempts to carve out a cinematic niche for Western martial artists, some of whom went on to have, long careers, some of whom didn't. And many of these films were delightfully absurd in one way or another. I think, partly because obviously they're grabbing onto a non-Western tradition and trying to bring it into the West and find ways to do that. And they're doing it 40 years ago when people didn't care about anything like, is it inappropriate to appropriate stuff in this way? And so we got some real goofiness. We got things like Jim Carter, which is about the world's deadliest fighting form, assuming that you have a pommel horse or parallel bars handy. Or we have like the craziness that is the final 20 minutes of American Ninja with hidden laser beam cybernetics and color-coded ninja. That film, for the first 17 minutes, you're kind of like, why was this film ever a thing? And then you get the last 20 minutes and you realize, because it's an amazing example of 80s camp. Day of the Panther doesn't have the kind of wackiness of either of those films, but it certainly embraces the fact that it is fun, trashy nonsense. It's packed with the pastel suits you'd expect of the 80s. It's all very kind of gauche and gaudy. There's a fantastic scene right at the beginning of the movie where there's this faux martial arts ceremony that's kind of like wince-inducingly tone-deaf about its depiction of non-Western kind of culture. Remember it's the 80s, the era of sort of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Go Ninja Go, and accept that going in, because if you're expecting any kind of understanding of or appreciation for non-Western philosophy or non-Western culture, you're not going to get it. It's the 80s. And finally, I wanted to talk about Brian Trenchard Smith. He's the director. He was a major figure in the 1980s Ozploitation cycle, where there were a bunch of Australian films that kind of had some, that really emphasised their Australianness and that had some international success off the back of that. His movies before this one included The Glorious Tacky Turkey Shoot, which is just this kind of great anti-Thatcherite dystopian future, the deadliest game knockoff. Well worth looking up if you want to spend an hour and a half with a deeply silly movie. And the thing about Trenchard Smith was that he was a man who could deliver a film on time and budget and make it look better than it probably ought to, given the money involved. He was also unabashedly straightforward about the projects he was working on, and he described this film straight up as adolescent macho adventure with as much credibly linked non-stop action as possible. Like, he knew exactly what film he was being asked to make here, and we can see that clarity in the movie. As I said, we have this delightfully lame mystic ceremony of the Panther Kung Fu sect at the beginning of the film, but then it launches straight into the first martial arts sequence, and thereafter we get the bare minimum of talky needed to justify the next bit of punchy kicky. Trenchard Smith is a director who knew exactly what movie he was being paid to make, and he delivered it. And Day of the Panther definitely profits from that approach. Not everything that he would go on to do did. This is the man who directed like Leprechaun 4 in space. So his willingness to give you the movie you were asking for didn't always do good things for him or the movie, but in this case it did. And I think his involvement really does help this film. It's not a good movie, but it's a fun movie. So next time, I'm going to be talking about Killjoy, an alleged comedy horror. Killjoy is neither good nor fun, but it is interesting. And we'll talk about why it's interesting next time. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and catch you when we talk about Killjoy.